Hi everybody, I'm back again. Yeah, or I'm still back. I don't know. Anyway, so here I am with another chapter of the Plague Wizards. These are manuscripts that my dad wrote, and I am basically reading them. This is the second last chapter, so for those of you who haven't been listening, this is like almost right at the end, so I really strongly encourage for you to go back to the beginning of the story and listen at the beginning until you get back to here. So I'm going to just launch right on in. This is chapter 14 of the Plague Wizards. You, Melunctal C. Talaran, are declared suspect of misuse of magic, in that you produced and released a deadly plague upon your own people. The grim watcher made a gesture. Remove him. Melunctal tried to protest that he hadn't done it, that he refused to agree to it. But all that seemed to come out was words of the plague-killing spell. The hands gripped him and pulled him away. He screamed and woke up in his bed screaming. He rubbed the palms of his hands on his face. This was not the first time he'd had that dream recently, nor the first time he'd woken up screaming. He still remembered the first time the Watchers declared he'd had magical potential. That was something he couldn't deny, in part because he was still a child, and this grim-faced adult had made the declaration about him. He realized now that even if he had, as a child, the nerve to deny that declaration, such denial would only have led him to being put on a list for careful watching, with condemnation as suspect, not much further down the road. He'd been selected for magical training. Saljashan needed wizards, if only to track down rogue magicians. This time, there was no possibility of refusal. To turn this down would be to condemn himself as suspect. Obviously, someone who had leanings toward becoming a rogue wizard. Then he'd be chosen to work on the project. Once more, refusal would have been fatal. To tell the truth, he'd been sufficiently indoctrinated regarding the reign of the Blue Blossom Wizard, as well as the nature of wizardry in Rosthan, where any dealer in magic had some potential to be a new Blue Blossom Wizard. Working against that possibility had been a laudable goal. But Jalani had taken the opportunity of Tangril's disaster to put the program into action, though he, Melunctal, had pointed out the dangers of that action. He'd been justified in the end, but that justification had a sour taste when one realized that those pink blotches on the map represented people dying. Could he have been more insistent? Should he have tried something besides meekly accepting Hajalani's declaration, then running off to Rosthan to try to counter what he feared? He shook his head. All he would have been able to achieve was condemnation as a suspect. His flight to Rosthan had achieved less than he'd hoped. He hadn't been able to counter the plague, or rather plagues. All he could do was rest free a moment here and there to cast the kill this spell on some of those colored blotches on the map of Saljashan. He couldn't ask Royan to set some of his wizards to helping Saljashan, which had produced this horror, not until Royan had made more progress in making all Rosthan safe. He couldn't risk to be relieved from other duties to try to save his country. All he could do was what he was doing, to save another little bit of it every day. Worse still, the kill this only endured for a day, if that. Afterward, the cleared space would begin to turn pink at the edges again. He might have as much success bailing in the ocean out with a pitcher. He sat for a long while, listening to the seabirds as they circled in the air, smelling the scent of the sea that came in from the tide line. A young messenger leaned in the doorway. "There's a fellow at the gate, a Saljashanite, asking if Melunctal's here." Royan looked up from his papers on his desk. "A Saljashanite looking for Melunctal? Probably not a friend, but let's have Melunctal look at him before we make a decision." They went to Melunctal's workroom. Melunctal looked up as they entered. "No progress as yet, Grandmaster. Even knowing something in the nature of one of the changes of one of the plagues is only limited help to trying to make these sort of predictions. Actually, we've come up with something else entirely. There's a Saljashanite at the gate asking for you. I can't imagine anyone from there just wanting to look you up to natter about old times. Do you have any notion who might have come looking for you?" Melunctal stood staring for a moment. "That man's worn to a stump," Royan realized. "No one. Perhaps one of the Watchers might have tracked me here, but I don't know. This is a bit far for them to come." Royan nodded. "Right. I'll do a watch spell, and see if you recognize him." He poured water into the bowl, then said the spell. The face of the water rippled, then cleared, showing the man at the gate. Melunctal stared at the picture wearily. "I wonder if this fellow is in a state where he'd even recognize his own mother," Royan thought. Then Melunctal's head came up. "It's Slider. He's a rogue wizard from Saljashan. He helped me get away." "Why would he be looking for you?" Melunctal rubbed his face. "I have no idea, Grandmaster." "Well, I suppose that we could ask him. Are you willing?" Melunctal paused. Yes, of course. I'll keep up some protections up around us until we have a better idea what he wants." They walked the path to the gate. The path was rutted and rough. That was one of the things that wizardry couldn't do much about. The increased cart and wagon traffic that went with the increase of the size of the colony meant the roads took a beating. With other pressing problems, road conditions were way down the list of priorities. Slider's facial expression only changed to a slight smile when he saw Melunctal. "Peace to you, Melunctal. Can you vouch for me with these fellows?" "Possibly so. I thought you had no intentions of leaving Saljashan." "I didn't, and I wouldn't, except for the plague. I was hoping you fellows would have an antidote for it by now." "Not quite. We do have a spell that kills it, though we can't always prevent it from coming back." Melunctal stopped and glanced at Royan, suddenly aware that he might have said too much. Royan nodded. "It's all right, Melunctal. We've been trying to tell everyone so it shouldn't hurt us if he knows." Then he addressed Slider. "You're a wizard yourself." "Good enough to manage to slide away from the Watchers for years." "Right. We're short of top-class wizards. We'll teach you this plague-killing spell in return for your helping us with our work here." Slider only considered for a moment. "I'll agree to that." Royan was bent over a table studying pictures of bacteria with Allison when Orment flung open the door and strode in. "Another Saljashanite, Royan? And you accept him with open arms?" Royan straightened. "It wasn't that casually done, Orment. He'll help us out, but he'll have limited access to the library, at least until he proves himself." "But another plague-making Saljashanite wizard." "He's not one of the ones that worked in the plagues. He's what they call over there a rogue wizard. One who practices in secret and hides himself from the authorities for fear of execution. Even worse, he's an outlaw to his own people, and you've welcomed him here? Can't you see the sort of risk you're running?" "Ormond, our whole existence from the time Tangirl cast his spell without shields has been running risks. We ran risks staying in Gagapang as long as we did, and ran risks in leaving. We've run risks getting here and staying, and in our work on the plagues. I've weighed each risk every time to the best of my abilities. I think the benefit of having another high-ranking wizard is worth the risk of whatever secrets he might steal." All this time, Orment was pacing up and down. By the time Royan had finished speaking, he seemed a little mollified. but only a little. He said nothing, but Royan was sure he was thinking deeply. Without any hint of warning, Ormet stepped behind Allison, his left arm around her neck, holding her chin up, while the point of his small knife pricking her skin over her jugular vein. All right, you've taken the decisions that brought us here. I happen to think that many of those decisions were wrong, and while I can't undo most of them, I can see you won't make any more decisions. What you'll do is start walking. Once I think you've gotten far enough to be no harm to us, I'll let her go join you. You try to come back, we've got enough magic to stop you. After all, you're just barely above me in rank. Royan considered. Allison was standing stiff, apparently paralyzed with fright. Ormet might have a slightly exaggerated notion of his ability compared to Royan's, but there was no doubt he knew how to open a vein on an animal or human. Nor was there any doubt he could press the knife home before the Grandmaster could do more than start a spell. All right, let her be. She has nothing to do with it. If you want to be Grandmaster, go ahead. No, she has everything to do with it. Tangrel brought her over with that spell that killed all our magicians. The lack of magicians gave Melunctil and his Saljashnite friends the opportunity to send the plague against us. Worse, she's been coming up with these notions of upsetting everything we know and leading you around by the nose or by the... Allison moved. With his attention on Royan, Orman's attention was just a little slow. Her left hand caught his right, just below where the knife protruded and twisted. Before Royan himself could start to move, she kicked back with her right foot to catch Ormant in the knee. She straightened his arm, continuing to his twist until the knife dropped. By now, she was facing him. Her knee drove up into his groin. The bottom of her fist slammed against the back of his head as he bent over, and when he fell, she stamped her foot on the back of his neck for good measure. She wheeled towards Royan, her hands coming up into what appeared to him to be a ready stance. He held his hands spread out from his sides, trying to look as non-threatening as possible. It's all right, Allison. You're safe now. Easy now. He continued to speak in a calm, reassuring voice, just quiet words to put her at ease. After what seemed like a long time, she slowly lowered her hands. Royan, Ormet was... He's on the floor behind you. He had a knife at your throat, but he was concentrating on me. You moved. I've never seen anything like it. She spoke almost as if in a dream. It was like that the other night. That man had a knife too. I didn't know what to do. It's all right, Allison. You're safe now. It's all over. She turned and looked down at the body, then bent over, felt for a pulse at the throat. She straightened. I think he's dead. Will his family want me killed in return? His family? Royan asked blankly, then suddenly remembered the situation from which he'd taken her at Strick's Bulg. No, his family is Pengua household, and I'm the head of the household. They'll take my decision. None of us have any blood relations left, not after Tangrel's disaster. He looked around. Well, I'd better call someone to take care of the body. How'll you explain that? Explain? I'll tell exactly what happened. He tried to use you as a hostage to make me leave, and you killed him. She wrapped her arms around herself as if she were cold. It's not as though I like killing people. I don't. I just don't want anyone to be able to... Her voice trailed off. He longed to take her in his arms and comfort her, but he sensed that would be no help. He rang a bell, and a servant came in shortly. The servant took in the scene. His eyes went wide. Don't stand there staring, man. Master Orment tried to use Allison as his hostage to take over Grandmastership. She killed him. The first thing I want is for you to get some woman servant to take care of her. It's been a hard thing for her. Then get some people to remove the body and prepare it for burial. Yes, Grandmaster. As the man went out, Royan realized he'd been very brusque with him. He'd have to make it up later. He'd have to get the wizards together very soon and announce what had happened. There was going to be a half a dozen rumors flying around by the time the servant returned. He looked at Allison. No, he couldn't offer much comfort, but he could make sure she wasn't alone. He waited. Generally speaking, Slider, they don't think much of Saljashanites here, Melunctil said. You might find it a bit different personally, having been a rogue wizard and not connected to the people who made the plague. But I'm afraid a lot of people will see Saljashanite and think plague maker. But you're here. A shrug. Where would I go? And besides, I was actually one of the ones who produced the plagues. It seems only right that I should be one of the ones to fight them. He stared off across the sea. Sometimes, though, he pointed. See that little speck out on the horizon? That's an island. Not much there. From what I can find out, sometimes I want to use my escape spell and go there. Slider looked at the horizon, then back to Melunctil. That distance? It'd kill you, unless you have done a lot of work on it since the last time since you gave it to me. No, I haven't done any more work on it. As for it killing me, does that matter? I'd hoped to be able to save Saljashan from the results of a mistaken decision, but all I can do is a bit here and a bit there. Not enough to do much good. I can't ask Royan to help save Saljashan either, not when he's stretched to the limit saving his own people. You think too much and too deeply, Melunctil. Be a little easier on yourself. You sound as though you're taking a personal responsibility for the plague and everything that came from it. As I understand it, it was Jalani's decision taken against your advice. I've told myself that. Still, I was one of the ones who had helped develop the plagues to the point where they were when Jalani made his decision. Worse yet, I did it willingly because I was preventing the rise of another Blue Blossom wizard. It wasn't until I got to Rasthan and the plague eventually actually came that I realized what a horror I created. To prevent some hypothetical Blue Blossom wizard from coming forth, I was willing to kill hundreds of thousands of people whose only crime was to live in Rasthan. Worse, I was right about the plagues changing. One of them already has, and is moving into Saljashan at a terrible rate. So now people are dying whose only crime was living under a government that would use a plague as a weapon. Not that the people would have been able to stop it. The project was being kept secret. And some poor fellow in Orisia, for instance, had to pay for what I did in his name. You're sounding as though the whole thing were an invention of Melunctil C. Talaran. But there were a lot of other people involved. But I'm not responsible because I took such a willing part in it? I can't assign blame to other people, not when I know what I did myself. No, I think it was time to go. He muttered a phrase and was gone. Slider stood for a moment, staring off at the island. Though there would be nothing he could see in this distance, he cursed and began to run back to the tower itself. Grand Master, Melunctil's gone. He may have just killed himself. Royan whirled on the messenger. They'd just about gotten Allison calmed down, and they didn't need someone coming in shouting. He gestured brusquely toward the door of the messenger. A young servant backed out, fear and confusion on his face. Royan followed him. Now, quietly, what is it? The wizard Slider, Grandmaster. He reports that he and Melunctil were walking and talking on the beach. Melunctil was unhappy about his role producing the plague, disturbed at what he'd done to his homeland. In the midst of the conversation, he used a certain escape spell he developed to take him to an island offshore. From what the wizard Slider says, using this particular spell to go such a distance would result in death. Royan looked back at the door behind him, then at the messenger. Wait here. He opened the door and stepped in. Allison was asleep on the bed with a woman servant sitting in a chair beside her. The servant looked up. Another emergency. I'll be back shortly. Yes, Grandmaster. The servant's manner suggested that the two women would be much better off without a man looming around in the background. Slider was extremely calm, but Royan supposed that a lifetime spent on the run from Saljashanite authorities would give a man clear appreciation of relative state of danger. Slider explained quietly and clearly. We were talking about the plagues and his part in producing them, and how he was generally upset about things. he couldn't do enough to save his people. And even the fact that he was right about it being too soon to send out the plagues was no consolation when Saljashin was dying. Then he started talking about this great escape spell he had developed to get himself out of Saljashin. That he had a great urge to send himself to that island on the horizon. I tried to make him see that the guilt wasn't all his own, but he'd finally made the decision. The spell took only a moment to work, then he was gone. It did occur to Royan that the rogue wizard might have had more to do with Melungtil's death than the passive role he described. But he himself knew how hard Melungtil had been driving himself, and had some sense of the man's state of mind. No, it was most likely that the situation had gone just as Slider had said. He's dead then? Unless he's refined that spell greatly, then plotted out some complex method of escape, yes. I don't think he intended to escape, not alive at any rate. Sanet's toes! He was too good a wizard to lose like this. He was too good a man for this world. If he hadn't gone today, it wouldn't have been much longer. Royan checked. Yes, I'm thinking of things from the perspective of the Grand Master of Pangua household. Everything is a resource to be used, and to be used carefully so as to get all the possible benefit out of it. Melungtil's death is a tragedy, and the least I can do for him is to think of him as a person. Melungtil nodded. I understand better than you think. All my life has been lived with the goal of keeping ahead of the authorities. I did a few things for people, but everything I did still had that notion in mind, to avoid the Watchers. There's a lot of decisions I might have made differently if it hadn't been on my mind all the time. Shorter chapter. And yes. Yeah. As I was saying before, this one's going to take a lot of editing to finish up. And yeah. That's neither here nor there. So thank you all for tuning in, and I will talk to you again very soon. Have a good night.